Hello, and welcome to the nonprofit world, where we highlight organizations and individuals who are passionate about empowering others to make a difference in our communities and around the world. I'm Paula Sorrells-Bean, your host for today's program. And with me, I am so excited to introduce to you Stuart from right here in the Farmington area. Welcome to our show, Stuart.
Thank you, Paul. Delighted to be here.
Yeah, I'm so glad that you're here with us today. Tell me just right off the bat about your last name, because we talked about that. You had to, when you started working in New York, you actually changed the pronunciation of your last name.
Yes, I grew up as Stuart Root. I went to college as Stuart Root. I went to law school as Stuart Root. But when I started practicing law in New York City, why nobody could understand the name Root. They were used to the word root. So I had to do in Rome what the Romans do and tailor my pronunciation to root. My children grew up and still use the word root. But when I got back to Farmington, strange as it must seem, and back to the so-called root of the matter, I found that the locals here who have known the family, going back to its origins in 1640, they all pronounced it Root. And I thought, eureka. I'm right where I ought to be.
That's right. That's great. I love that story. So, Stuart, you were a lawyer, and you worked for one of the oldest law firms in New York City. Can you tell us a little bit about how you started out with that particular law firm?
Well, yes. I interviewed with the firm Cadwallader, Wickersham, and Taft. Curiously enough, the Cadwallader family and the Wickersham family were both Philadelphia families, and Taft was Ohio family. But they all had members of the New York bar that formed the partnership and were known and still are known by the somewhat unwieldy but nevertheless perhaps pompous name of Cadwallader, Wickersham, and Taft. There have been other efforts made to change that name, most notably when Governor Dewey was leaving the gubernatorial office in New York State. He was looking for a place to hang his hat and interviewed with Cadwallader and insisted that if he joined the firm, why the firm would have to change its name to Dewey, etc. And the partners at that time said, well, thanks, but no thanks. Mm-hmm. So he went over then to a firm which, strangely enough, was known by the name of Root Ballantyne, which was Elihu Root's firm, Elihu Root being a very famous New York politician, New York State and national politician. So they dropped the Root or Root family and took on Governor Dewey, which became Dewey Ballantyne. I think that firm is now expired. Okay. From sad circumstances. But that was my introduction to practicing law in New York State and to some of the, prominent members of the bar.
Mm-hmm. Now, you didn't grow up in New York.
No, I grew up in Ohio.
Okay.
And in a community with the very unlikely name of Chagrin Falls, Ohio. People don't believe it, but nevertheless, it is a town southeast of Cleveland by about 20 miles. And I've had a lot of fun being from Chagrin Falls. the butt of numerous jokes among people who are familiar with me. And it's been useful. And then I went to college in Ohio, in Delaware, Ohio. Yes, that's right, Delaware, Ohio. And named after the Indians, of course, by the name of Ohio Wesleyan University.
Okay.
And from there, I went into the Army and then to Columbia Law School.
Okay, great. And then from there to directly to New York after Columbia Law School?
Yes, that's right. That's right. I was already pretty well, familiar in New York City. And the simplest thing was simply to stay there, and it was where, the most interesting things were happening in the wonderful world of law.
In the wonderful world of law. That's
Right.
great. What kind of law did you practice?
Well, I had aspirations of doing trial work, but somewhere along the line in my first year, I was seduced into doing real estate, which on the face of it seemed to me to be a bit uninteresting. Mm-hmm. But once I got into it, I thought it was quite fascinating. And so I practiced.
Sure, especially in New York.
Yes, that's right. Exactly so. Exactly so. I worked in mainly New York City transactions. But as time went on, I got more and more involved in Washington and Fannie Mae, and then as counsel for setting up Freddie Mac.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Was hired after an interview with Tom Bomar, who at the time was executive director and CEO of originally Freddie Mac. And that was a wonderful relationship, actually. I regard Tom Bomar as one of the most comprehending and intelligent real estate gentlemen I've ever encountered.
Mm-hmm. Wow, that's very interesting.
Yeah, it was great work. It was great work, and I loved working with Tom, and the opportunity to leave my fingerprints all over the original papers of a brand new government agency. Mm-hmm. Was exciting. The unfortunate thing, in my view, and I've written about this, was that after a while, Tom left, and the people that came after him were very eager to maximize the volume of transactions that they could do. And that led to some deterioration in the quality of the loans that they were buying and selling. That, unfortunately, I think, sowed the seeds of Freddie Mac's problems, which are visible to everybody now, but remained shrouded for decades, actually.
Mm-hmm. Wow. You have some strong ties to your ancestors.
Yes.
And you've shared some of those stories with me, and I would love for you to share some of those with our listening and watching audience.
Well, I can't think of anything that I'd rather talk about. Well, it was never clear to me as a youngster where the family started, on this side of the pond, as it's called. Mm-hmm. But over the years, it became very clear to me that it started right here in Farmington in 1640 with my ancestor, John Root. His brother had come over 3 years earlier and settled in West Hartford.
Okay.
and he's memorialized on the Founders Monument in Hartford. But when John came over, he came directly to Farmington. He probably had dinner or something at his brother's house, I don't know. But at any rate, and shortly thereafter was married to a Mary Kilbourne, who was from Glastonbury. Now, Mary Kilbourne came over in 1637, perhaps on the same vessel as John, or as the brother Thomas, I don't know. But at any rate, curiously enough, Mary Kilbourne's passenger list included the Morse family, M-O-R-S-E, who were ancestors of my mother.
Okay.
So there you had my mother and my father in their earlier iterations connecting on this ship called Increase. Increase was a very prominent ship for immigrants from England here. The family histories commenting about and starting off with John and Thomas said that they left England because they had an aversion to war. And what they were referring to, of course, is the Royalists versus the Roundheads, and Charles the First's, how to say, misadventures, I suppose, resulting in his tenure as king being cut short through the loss of his head, of course. But all of that history is, to me, quite fascinating.
It's fascinating.
Yes.
It is very fascinating. So you have a book here, Farmington in Connecticut, and we were looking earlier at a plot of land that belonged to John Root.
That's correct.
And it's in a pretty nice little area of Farmington. I mean, I have no idea what it was like back then, but it's
right. It's right on the edge of what is now Miss Porter's School.
Yeah.
And a main gateway to the fields, which were used by all the proprietors or settlers, I think, in the southeast part of town.
So how does it feel to be back in the same area where where you know the history of your family?
Well, it's wonderful, and psychically, it's immensely rewarding. And I already trespassed on your good humor to refer to returning to my roots, but and anyway, that's the fact. All right.
That's right. That's right. Now, did you raise your children in Ohio?
Yes.
Okay.
Oh, I'm sorry. In New Jersey.
New Jersey. Okay.
Princeton, New Jersey, largely, not exclusively, it was largely.
Okay.
But they really never got the Ohio bug, except my daughter, who went to Case Western Reserve University for law school.
Okay.
And she, I think, would, if she had her druthers, would settle in Chagrin Falls if she had a choice. And I have my grandchildren who have been there. One of them was studying the falls, the actual falls. It's a 33-foot fall for the river does, right in the middle of town. And she's looking at the water cascading down, and said to me, looked up and said to me, I love Chagrin Falls. Warmed my heart. Anyway,
I'm sure. Grandchildren can do that
Yes,
so easily.
indeed. Yes, indeed. That's right.
So easily. Now, you also have a family member that was a Nobel Prize winner.
Yes, that was Elihu. Elihu was a descendant also of John's.
Okay.
But the Elihu branch left Farmington at an early age, and then moved on to New York, where Elihu's father, Orrin, was a professor at Hamilton College in Clinton, New York. And Elihu was a graduate of Hamilton also. And his father was a mathematics professor. At any rate, quite a learned family. Mm-hmm. But those mathematic genes did not make it to me.
I can identify very well with that. So you're a 13th generation after John Root.
Yes, that's right.
Who was the founder, one of the founders of Farmington.
Correct, yeah.
It's pretty exciting.
Well, it's nice.
It's pretty neat.
But pleasant, yeah.
Yeah, yeah. So there's another side of you that we haven't touched on yet, and that is that you started singing as a young boy.
I did.
And how old were you when the first time that you remember singing or enjoying singing?
Hard to say, maybe about 6 years old or so.
Okay.
When I was a cherub in the cherub choir.
Okay.
In the Methodist Church in Chagrin Falls, and I loved it, and never gave it up. Really, I've been quite blessed with two careers, one vocationally, which we've already discussed, in law, and the other was avocationally, and I've been a part of major choirs in New York City, and when traveling, or when I was in the Army and stationed in Heidelberg, Germany, the Heidelberg Bachverein. So it's always stayed with me, and I'm still doing it.
Mm-hmm. That's wonderful. That's wonderful. So you mentioned to me that you were in the Methodist choir, and then you were lured away from the Methodist choir by another church.
Yes. That was in Cleveland.
Mm-hmm. And how old were you then?
16, I think.
Okay.
Or 17, maybe, whatever, give or take a week. Yes. Cleveland has a Trinity Cathedral. It's Episcopal. And it's largely financed by the Mather family. Curiously enough, the Mathers are very well known in Hartford as well.
Okay. The same family?
Yes,
okay.
Same family. That's right. And there's a lot more to that story, but I don't know exactly what the circumstances of the Mathers were. But you have to understand that northeastern Ohio, anchored on the west side by Cleveland, was what was originally in an area called New Connecticut, because, for complicated reasons, Connecticut ended up being the state jurisdiction over that part of Ohio. This is in colonial times.
That's interesting.
Yes, it goes back to actually Charles the Second ascent to the throne, and his having given to the Hartford colony certain rights that would be familiar to you by the existing north and south parallels of Connecticut, but then extending all the way to the South Sea, so-called, which was the Pacific Ocean. So there's this bacon strip of land that went all the way across. But in time, after the Revolution, while other claims started to pop up involving that same strip of land, the parallels, and Connecticut lost one battle to Pennsylvania in an area called the Wyoming Valley. So Connecticut made a deal with under the Articles of Confederation, and all of this is circa the Revolutionary War, made a deal that it would give up this is after the Revolution, immediately after the Revolution, it would give up its claims to the West,
Okay.
except for the area that's called the Western Reserve. And the deed that reserved to Connecticut 140 miles, roughly speaking, west of the Pennsylvania line in the area of Pittsburgh. That 140 miles or so was retained by Connecticut. And there's a copy of that quitclaim deed saying reserved, however, to Connecticut, that 140-mile segment, which is actually very well known in Ohio, but not very well known at all in Connecticut.
How about that?
As being a part of original Connecticut property. But Connecticut sold off by auction that parcel is an area of the state, sold off that area of the state to a group of investors called the Connecticut Land Company, and they bought it and then proceeded to subdivide it. Some people made a lot of money, some people lost money, actually, on that real estate venture. But that was quite an interesting, development in the colonies before the Constitution.
Wow. Well, I want to get back to your singing for a second.
Oh, really?
Yeah, I do. Because you were, one of the things that that you had mentioned to me when you were, I think it was when you were at Trinity, was that you actually got paid to do some singing.
Well, it was, yes, I was a paid chorister, or I was not a boy chorister any longer, but in the male chorus. And we had a treble group of sopranos, altos, but then we also had an adult of tenor and bass section, baritone bass section. And that was great fun because it was my introduction to, the Anglican tradition and the formalities of Anglican service. And was led by a fellow who was a nationally known organist at the time, Edwin Arthur Kraft, who had a very curious way of conducting, and he would conduct as if he were playing the organ. You know, and you had to know where you were in the music to follow his conducting. It was no longer anything like this. It all had to do with where his hands would be on the organ as he was conducting.
Now, you went to college on a scholarship.
Yes, that's
And
right.
You did not initially go in to become a lawyer, is that correct?
No, I went to college on a voice scholarship, actually. I auditioned at Ohio Wesleyan, and they welcomed me with a scholarship. Not a full ride scholarship, but it was a half tuition, I think, which made or break, for me, the opportunity to go to Ohio Wesleyan, for which I remain still quite grateful. And it was a wonderful experience, and it was a great training, but it didn't take me long to before I realized that if I were going to become, how to say, proficient in that area of music, that is to say, liturgical music, why I would have to become proficient on the organ, and there was no chance that was ever going to happen. So I saw the wisdom of, after I was in it for the 1 year, I saw the wisdom of changing my major from music to philosophy, and that's what I pursued.
So you got your degree in philosophy, and then when did you actually decide that you wanted to become a lawyer?
Well, after I finished college, it was at a time when everybody served in the military, either on active duty or for 2 years, or 7 years in reserves, which meant you had to go to meetings every week or every 2 weeks or something. Anyway, I decided just to get it all over behind me, and I went in the Army as a enlisted man, and that was great fun, which not many people can say that. But in that period, why, it was right after World War II. We're talking now about 1955, 56, 57. And I went into the Army as an enlisted man, and was stationed in Heidelberg, Germany. Well, Heidelberg is quite centrally located in Europe. You can go for 6 hours or 7 hours drive from Heidelberg and be in Paris, or if you're going the other direction, you could be in Munich. And we did. So that was, how to say, a great benefit to me of being located in Heidelberg, aside from the fact that Heidelberg itself was quite a lovely community. There was a rumor was that Heidelberg was the subject of a lot of negotiation behind the curtain. I don't mean the Iron Curtain, but behind the scenes during the war, to this effect that the U.S. military told the Germans that if they used gas on the troops as they were marauding through or conquering, more properly put, coming from the west to the east, they used gas as they did in World War I, why we would level Heidelberg. Well, most of the military in Germany, and high command in Germany, had attended Heidelberg University. And the thought of the university being leveled didn't sit well with them. So we got to Heidelberg before the Allies had, didn't touch it at all. And we had no, how to say, instances of gas being used in World War II against the Allied forces.
Okay. All right, good. So once again, getting getting back to your music, your singing.
Yes.
You also were part of the Canterbury Choral Society.
Canterbury Choral Society, yes.
In New York.
That's right. At 50th, at Fifth Avenue and 90th Street. Yes. As the Church of the Heavenly Rest, and as Episcopal Church, and it had a music director who was a phenomenal musician and person, Charles Dodsley Walker. To know Charles was to love him. I mean, he was most charismatic. So I loved singing with Charlie for several years. That is to say, about 50 years. Not every year, but enough of the 50 so that it was a majority of those years I was with Canterbury.
That's awesome. That's wonderful. One of the things that you brought with you is a picture here. And I don't know if our camera will be able to pick this up, but this is a picture of you with Ronald Reagan.
Yes.
So can you tell us a little bit about what was going on
Yes.
during the time of this picture?
Yes. Well, at that time, I had left the practice of law briefly to be president of the Bowery Savings Bank, which was at times the largest savings bank and largest thrift in the United States, but right at that time it was one of the largest in New York. But California institutions had eclipsed it as on a national level. At any rate, I had worked on problems that were confronting the thrifts, which were quite serious. In fact, we were staring down the barrels of having many thrifts being eliminated and loss of in effect, a billion-dollar industry, which was strongly in support of housing in the country. So President Reagan had a friend who was originally in his cabinet in California, Gordon Luce, who was at the same time a senior member of a California S&L. And he passed along the word to President Reagan that this was a serious problem, national problem. Reagan convened a meeting of senior thrift executives, and 5 of us were summoned to the White House to discuss it with the president. I went with a mission, an agenda, and the president heard us out and then deputized Attorney General Meese, I think he was at that time, to explore the problem, explore the solution that we were proposing, and eventually it was put into law in the Garnet St. Germain Bill of 1982.
Okay.
That picture, incidentally, was, I believe, April 1, 1982.
1982.
Yeah.
Okay, great. So recently, I believe you went to the Westminster Church.
Yes.
And sang there with
Stuart Duncan.
Okay.
Who's a
Tell us about that.
wonderful organist, musician, and he and I collaborated on doing a few hymns that we decided on. And I could have spent a lot more time doing that, but actually my voice gave out after 45 minutes or so, and so we had to call it a day. But anyway, that was great fun. And Stuart is a phenomenal organist. And we cut a tape, or we cut a, I don't know, disc or something. I don't know what we did.
You made some music.
We made some music. Right.
And you recorded it.
And we recorded it.
Good.
That's right.
Good. And there were hymns, 4 or 5 hymns that you sang?
Yes, that's right.
Okay.
Yeah.
He played and you sang, or does he also sing?
No, he didn't. He does sing, but he didn't.
He didn't. Okay.
Right. Fortunately, he left it to me to provide the vocal part.
Okay. Well, I will be eager to hear that. I'm excited to hear it.
I hope you're not disappointed.
I'm sure I won't be.
Yes.
I'm sure I won't be. Now, besides hymns, I know you've sang a lot of hymns over the years.
Yes. Yes.
Through the Methodist Church and then the Trinity Cathedral and others. What other kind of music do you like to sing?
Well, I've done most of the great oratorios, and that is like Bach's B minor Mass, St. John Passion, St. Matthew Passion, and how to say the normal cadre of classical choral works.
I'm sure you've had an opportunity to sing like the Lord's Prayer on numerous occasions, probably.
I have, yeah, that's right.
It's one of my favorites to hear sung.
Albert Hamelot, Lord's Prayer. In fact, I've done that with Village Gate.
Okay.
Now, the classical music, that is to say, oratorios and cantatas and that sort of music has always been something that was pleasing to my ear. But another dimension entirely was what's called Gilbert and Sullivan. And
I've heard of them.
Yeah, Gilbert and Sullivan has been an obsession of mine ever since I was in high school.
I see the big book that you have there.
Yes,
on
that's
Gilbert and
right.
Sullivan.
This is my Bible for GNS work. And I love it, and have over the years been called upon to dust off a patter song or two at dinner parties or convivial events where most of the people are receptive. However, I had one client who really disliked GNS.
How about that?
He had a college friend. They were both AD members at Harvard. He had a college friend who used to tweak him, and at dinner parties, why, his friend, his name Bartle Bull, wonderful guy, Bartle would lean on me to provide some comic relief, I guess, to the mealtime. And one very funny event was I was sitting at a table, and the woman I was sitting next to, a very distinct British accent, said, oh, have you been to these dinners before? And I said, yes. And she said, well, what happens? What happens after the dinner? And I said, well, if this one goes like the last one went, why, Bartle would get up, greet everybody, and then tap on me for a song. And she said, well, what will you sing? I said, well, it'll probably be something from Gilbert and Sullivan. This is a birthday party, so that would suggest the Pirates of Penzance, which starts out as a birthday party. So we continued to chat. And then sure enough, Bartle got up and tapped me, figuratively. So I got up and I said, well, now you've heard me sing the Pirates King song, so I'll have to tap something else from GNS and the Pirates. And I said, a duet. And if anybody here knows the other part of the duet, please stand up and join in. If not, I'll just have to do both parts myself. Well, so then I start, oh, false one, you have deceived me. And the woman sitting next to me stood up and chimed in. Carter, in the meantime, was sitting there aghast, and he said, oh, my God, now there's two of them.
So the same woman that you had been sitting there having
Yes.
a conversation with.
Well, the conversation shortly became about doing that duet.
Okay.
She had been the lead alto with Joy Le Carte, which is the original GNS company in England. And so she knew all of these alto parts cold. We had to adjust a little bit to get it in a key that both of us can do. And that was great fun, and Carter made it more than worthwhile when he showed his disgust, much to my amusement and Bartle's as well.
Well, I'm sure that our audience would not want to hear me join in on a duet, but I would love to hear you sing something from one of Gilbert and Sullivan's, even the Pirates of Penzance.
Oh my!
Oh my! Are you ready to do that? Are you prepared to do that?
I'm always prepared to do it.
We'd love for you to.
I'm not sure what that might be, but are you familiar with the Pirate King song?
I'm not real familiar with it,
Yeah.
but
Well,
if you sing it, maybe I'll recognize.
well, maybe you will. I hope it's recognizable. But anyway, it goes like this. Oh, better far to live and die under the brave black flag I fly than play a sanctimonious part with a pirate head and a pirate heart. Away to the cheating world go you, where pirates all are well to do. But I'll be true to the song I sing, and live and die a pirate king. For I am a pirate king, and it is a glorious thing to be a pirate king, etc.
I like that.
Well,
Very nice.
thank you.
Very nice.
Oh my.
Now, there was another one that that is from the Pirates of Penzance.
Yes, another well-known one, a patter song, is the Major General song. The Major General comes on and explains about all the things that he knows having to do with the world, but none of it having to do with military knowledge. That he seemed to be short on. But he entertains the audience, in his case, with a well-known, probably the best known of Gilbert and Sullivan patter songs. I hope my voice lasts. And you'd recognize it, I think, if I did the first few bars. And it is, I am the very model of a modern major general of information, vegetable, animal, and mineral. I understand equations both the simple and quadratical. By binomial theorem, I am teeming with a lot of news, with many cheerful facts about the square of the hypotenuse, etc. That's the first verse. And then each verse has got a tag of several measures that kind of winds up that verse. And the second verse is wound up with the Major General singing, Then I can write a washing bill in Babylonic uniform and tell you every detail of Caractacus's uniform. In short, in matters vegetable, animal, and mineral, I am the very model of a modern major general. Now, most people listening to that are entertained. Very few, I think, don't know who was Caractacus. And the answer is he was a Welsh terrorist who bedeviled the Romans as they were trying to move from England into Wales. But they caught up with him, incarcerated him, took him to Rome. He made out all right, but the words, I can tell you every detail of Caractacus's uniform, are best understood when you realize that Caractacus wore a loincloth. That was it for his uniform.
Every detail of
every
the uniform.
Every detail of his uniform.
That's great.
Right.
That's great.
That's typical of Gilbert. Gilbert is a wonderful, wonderful humorist and a fascinating person with words.
Yeah. Yeah, that's great. So is there anything, I mean, you were an attorney, you did a lot of exciting things, you had, you got to visit with President Reagan, is there anything that you would do differently in your life?
Well, I'm sure if I had to ponder that question at any length, I might find something, but frankly, no. I've had a blessed life, avocationally with music, vocationally with law, and I'm quite, and I have a phenomenal set of children and grandchildren. It's been good.
That in itself makes it all worthwhile,
Right,
doesn't it?
exactly so.
Have the children and the grandchildren.
Right.
And some of them live close by, right?
Well, I have a son living in Farmington. He's been here for over 20 years. And he has a twin brother in Indianapolis who's a doctor, and a sister who's in Philadelphia who's a lawyer with the EPA and has been for going on 25 years now, I guess. And then a firstborn who's single but enjoying golfing out in Arizona, where he works with financial instruments.
Okay. Wow.
So,
Great.
yeah, and three of them have been child producing, all except my son in Arizona. But at any rate, the 9 grandchildren.
9 grandchildren.
Are phenomenal children.
And what are their age ranges?
Well, right now, I'd say the youngest, I think, is maybe 15, 16.
Okay.
And the oldest is 24, I think.
Okay.
Yeah, they're quite closely gripped. I have the youngest is a former chorister at St. Thomas Episcopal Church at 53rd and 5th Avenue, which is a world-class.
That's New York?
New York,
Okay.
yeah. And then I shouldn't really dwell on this, but I guess I'm going to get something wrong, I'm sure. But anyway, quite astonishingly, why I have triplets in that group of 9. 2 of them are females, and those females are both now freshmen at Princeton University.
Oh, how about that?
Yeah, it's quite amazing.
Any other music
Those two
musicians in your family?
Those 2 are very accomplished musically also.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's great. That's great. So when you get together as a family, do you make music together?
Not if they can help it.
Yeah. Are there? I know one of the songs that I would love to hear you sing is, if you're willing and want to, is the Lord's Prayer.
Oh, yes.
I don't know if you have all those.
Here?
Sure, if you, I would love that.
Well, you can reserve judgment until you've heard it.
Okay.
But I'm not sure about the pitch, but Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our debts as we forgive our debtors. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, and the power, and the glory, forever. Amen. Is that the one you were thinking of?
Yes, yes. I just love it. That's wonderful. Thank you.
You're very welcome.
Thank you.
Thanks for your interest.
You're welcome. Is there another, either a hymn or another song that you just love to sing? Is there something, that just brings joy to your heart that you just love to sing?
Oh my! Well, there are several, but possibly "The Lost Chord." Does that mean anything to you?
The Lost Chord.
Yeah. It was
Sure.
it was a favorite during the 19th century, 1800s, middle 1800s, by Arthur Sullivan. Also,
Okay.
I don't know, it's 4 or 5 minutes long.
I think we have two.
Okay.
Do you want to sing like just a little bit of it, part of it?
Well, it starts out with, seated one day at the organ, I was weary and ill at ease, and my fingers wandered idly over the noisy keys. I know not what I was playing, or what I was dreaming then, but I dropped one chord of music, like the sound of a great amen. Like the sound of a great amen, etc.
That's wonderful. I don't think I've heard that one before.
Oh, really?
I don't think so.
Well, it's worth knowing.
I like that. I'm going to look it up. It's called
The Lost Chord.
The Lost Chord.
You can get it on YouTube.
Okay. Yeah, I'll look it up.
It's fun.
Wonderful. It is. It sounds like fun. I love to sing, but I'm not gifted with a.
It was written. The music was written by Sullivan for a pre-existing poem. But the circumstance was that his brother Fred had just died, and so Sullivan really wrote this as a tribute to his brother.
Okay, great, wonderful. Well, Stuart, it has just been a joy to have you on the show today.
Wonderful. Well, you've been a wonderful interrogator. Not at all like the Inquisition I was concerned about.
You were expecting. Well, I am so glad that you joined us today, and I'm so glad that you were able to share with us some of your family history and some your own history, and certainly to share with us your music. I just thank you so much.
Well, you're very welcome, and thank you for your interest.
Well, you're welcome. You're welcome. And I'm Paula Sorrells-Bean from the nonprofit world. And I encourage you to find your passion and make a difference in the life of someone else today. Thank you, and have a wonderful day.